I asked him about the fatting, and he said that it hadn't been serious activism, that it was just for publicity or something like that. Be careful what jokes you tell, guys. We're going to debunk some historical fat acceptance myths today, and the first one I want to start with is why I'm wearing this shirt. The 90s was not the time when everyone wanted to look like Callista Flockhart or Kate Moss when she was on drugs, and in fact, even the whole heroin thing, the H-chic, I don't want to say the term because of YouTube censorship, that was really about the drugs initially. The term got hijacked by people in that E followed by the letter D world who want to make everything about their problem or project their problem onto everything, and they turned that word into meaning something else. And it was only ever a niche thing of the modeling industry, and there was a huge epidemic of people being on substances. If they were women, it was later assumed they must have had this problem when they really had a drug problem, and no one wanted to admit to being on drugs because frankly people who are on drugs are usually more of a problem for an employer. They're more of a liability. They're more of a pain in the neck to work with than someone who has an ed, usually, right? So people wouldn't come out and say that. They would let people think they had an ed. But it was not true that everyone wanted to look like that. All that really changed, there was more body shaming of anyone who was too fat or too bony. The major difference between the 90s and today is that you're not allowed to have women who are underweight on TV anymore. People lose their minds. You're always allowed to have men underweight. No one batted an eyelid. It's used as a sight gag, much as how like men and women are overweight on TV. It's used as a comedy device very often. It's making fun of the fact that they are obese. All these men who are typecast as the really underweight guy, and it's like funny. They're allowed to be underweight. Underweight women, totally taboo. And if you were too fat or too bony, you could be beloved. People would respect your work, like Dawn French. Like everyone loved Dawn French in the 90s, and so many other, Vanessa Feltz, Lisa Riley. This is very British focused. Those are the ones that come to my mind. Oprah in the United States. And it was just normal that most people were a healthy weight, like Xena and Buffy. Maybe some people today are trying to say that they're too thin, but I'm pretty sure medically, if you had them put in a DEXA scan, put on the scales, very healthy people, and that's what most people looked like and wanted to look like. A few gossip columns were weird and thought everyone was too fat, right? But there was a few weird gossip columnists who had it. These are my very 90s jeans. Or I don't know, some of this, even this as well, this one might be more Eagle. I'm sorry, I do apologize for that. I'm trying my best. Let's get onto the meat of the video.
The fat acceptance movement started in 1967 when Steve Post, a 23-year-old man, held a fat-in Central Park.
So I wanted to start with this because this is the video that really got me looking into the history of fat acceptance more. But I looked up Steve Post. So this is the real guy who actually started fat acceptance. It was not, as fat acceptance will tell you, fat black queer women. Fat black queer disabled women. It was not two men who were into larger ladies in that way. Steve Post, the 5'11", 210 pound. I looked it up. That makes him in the overweight range, not obese, and he would probably have worn a 1X in today's sizing for a man. And he organised the first fat-in because he felt that fat people were being discriminated against. He said he once weighed 250 pounds and wishes he did again. By the fat acceptance on TikTok standards, he was only mid-size. That's a 2X. I looked it up. They would only consider that mid-size. The ones who would acknowledge the word mid-size, others would say he was very low, small fat. Mr. Post said he was a little disappointed that more fat people didn't show up, but he was heartened that there were a lot of skinny ones. There weren't that many big people. Like, most people were slim. Just like in the 90s, people think, why was everyone so thin? They must have all had AIDS. No, people just hadn't got the big obesity crisis yet. Most people were healthy weight, not under, okay? And so in 1967, even more so. I found this obituary, which is really interesting. It was written by someone who he used to work with. We announced and sometimes led a zillion demonstrations. Programs and personalities on the station supported the struggle for civil rights, protests against the Vietnam War, the use of recreational drugs, the fight against injustice of all sorts, and later, women's and gay rights. So this guy was politically aligned with the modern fat acceptance movement. What did he possibly do wrong? And the guy goes on to say he had no enemies, everyone loved him. And there is like nothing this guy could have done that would offend them. I think it's possibly that he wasn't fat, and he the kind of person that fat acceptance is very openly hostile to. A lot of them, I should say. It's not everyone. A lot of them are very openly misandristic, really do not like cis straight men at all. He was also mid-size. I honestly think a big part of it is they didn't want a mid-size person to have been the person who started their movement. They're offended when mid-sized people talk as if they think they are fat. How they talk about mid-sized people. This is another Fun Thai Times video.
So what I personally have a problem with is mid-sized folks talking up and over larger plus-size folks and not acknowledging the privilege that they do have.
Because it's not more representation, it just gets in the way of an actual movement created by actual fat people that need actual help. The thing that non-fat people are doing with the mid-size trend is trying to create space in a movement that is not for them, because this movement is not about justifying and validating your own insecurities.
Sounds like, I mean, Steve Post, the guy who started it, seemed to think it was. He was talking about the advertising campaigns have attempted to make us feel guilty about our size. People should be proud of being fat. We want to show we feel happy, not guilty. That's why we're here. She was complaining about, right, that it's not about advertising making you feel bad. It's about all the limited access that we have to plain see. Like, she was basically saying only that stuff's valid. You complaining that clothes don't fit you perfectly well in the size, that doesn't count. But the guy who started the movement was in that range. They would now call a privileged mid-sizer. This is someone who wrote about Steve Post after they passed away. They had a memorial service in March 2015. He passed away 2014. Right before the body positivity movement, okay? She's got a page from his autobiography, pictures from the fat in demonstration with a placard of Twiggy. This is the caption that she's linked from his book, apparently, about it. She interprets the fact that it's in his book at all as meaning it must have been important to him. So the placard was on stage in the memorial service, so she's saying it must have been important to him. There's a comment from Bill Fabrey himself, so one of the two founders of the NAAFA. I was interviewed by Steve Post sometime in the 1970s, I think for research in some project or article he was working on. I asked him about the fat-in, and he said that it hadn't been serious activism, that it was just for publicity or something like that. But I told him it had been inspiring to me anyway, as NAAFA's founder, and to author Lou Louderback, who wrote Fat Power and was a NAAFA co-founder as well. I was disappointed that Steve seemed to have no energy where fat activism was concerned. Guys, that sounds to me like it was a joke, and he was maybe being too polite to say that to this guy's face. Unfortunately, we can't ask him, right? We're only getting this second hand from this guy. Given that this guy was kind of a radio, I don't know if shock jock quite, but he was mostly doing comedy stuff, irreverent humour, a little bit like Howard Stern, from what I gathered from reading about him. I think it sounds like it was a joke, like it was, or you were meant to maybe think it was serious, but not be sure, or it was meant to be the kind of thing he wanted you to think it was serious, but he was laughing because it wasn't really. I'm going to say it sounds to me like the fat acceptance movement and all those things the guy was saying in the newspaper, it was a goof. Be careful what jokes you tell, guys. Someone out there will take it seriously, because a lot of people out there have various mental illnesses that you might not be aware of or taking into account.
By 1980, the demographics of the organization was almost exclusively white. There are references to the lack of racial diversity in NAAFA from early newsletters, with one member saying, "I wonder if NAAFA may itself have too narrow an ethnic basis. We appear, for example, to have little or no Black or Latin membership."
Little or no. Early newsletters were acknowledging this. Well, what about the queer and disabled part? Is there anything about that?
NAAFA membership also seemed to be almost exclusively straight, considering there are a lot of writings that don't look favorably at lesbians in the newsletters.
They were homophobic.
And last but not least, most of the women were also morbidly obese.
So what have we learned today? I've learned that the fat acceptance movement not only was not started by fat, black, disabled, queer women, not that it should matter, but they clearly think it does in the movement now. The closest I could see to anything regarding disability is that some of them, because they were obese, were struggling to walk as far as they needed to, but they never framed it as a disability thing. They never mentioned disabled people. A lot of them didn't even want lesbians in it until, I guess, more recently. I'm not saying they were more homophobic and racist than any other group of people, but at the time, but they certainly were not, like, it's not the way it was presented now. The next video will be on an E followed by the letter D, toxic ritualistic organization. It won't be a clinic as such, but it is a charity with a lot of power that is in the ed space, and it's very interesting. They do have influence and power, and it's a bit different from the other ones I've covered, where it's, spoiler, some of them in that organization actually seem to be pro-obesity and some don't, and I don't know if they've not noticed yet. So yeah, I had to take a break from the ed clinics because they were really annoying me. I can't just do that. It will drive me up the wall. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this. I'll see you next time.